It was the morning of 18 April 1942, and 16 American B-25 bombers were rising off the deck of an aircraft carrier in the Pacific to drop bombs on the home islands of Japan for the first time in the war. By sundown the next day, 8 of the airmen who had flown those bombers would be in the hands of the Japanese military. Most of them would not come home. Stay with this one, because the Doolittle Raid is the story everyone knows. What happened to the men the Japanese caught is the story almost no one does. 4 months after Pearl Harbor, the American military needed to hit Japan back. Specifically, it needed to hit the Japanese home islands, the cities, the place the Japanese people believed could never be reached. The plan was unprecedented. 16 twin-engine B-25 Mitchell bombers, modified to take off from an aircraft carrier, would launch from the USS Hornet in the Pacific, fly to Japan, drop their bombs, and then continue west to land in China, where Chinese forces friendly to the Americans would meet them. The bombers were too heavy to land back on the carrier. The pilots knew it before they took off. The plan was one way. The commander of the raid was a 45-year-old Army Air Corps officer named Jimmy Doolittle. On the morning of 18 April 1942, 80 airmen climbed into 16 B-25s on the deck of the Hornet. The carrier was rolling in heavy seas. The wind was wrong. They took off anyway, hundreds of miles further from Japan than the plan had called for, because a Japanese picket boat had spotted them, and they had to launch immediately or be lost. They bombed Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. Then they flew west into the dark, toward China. Most of the bombers made it to the Chinese coast. Most of the crews bailed out or crash-landed and were found by Chinese villagers who hid them, fed them, and moved them through the countryside to friendly forces. 2 of the bombers did not make it. The bomber commanded by First Lieutenant Dean Hallmark went down off the coast of China. Hallmark, his co-pilot Robert Meter, and his navigator Chase Nielsen made it to shore alive. 2 of his crewmen, William Dieter and Donald Fitzmaurice, drowned in the surf. The bomber commanded by First Lieutenant William Farrow came down in Japanese-occupied territory near Nanking. All 5 men in the crew were captured by Japanese soldiers within hours. Farrow, his co-pilot Robert Hite, his navigator George Barr, his bombardier Jacob DeShazer, and his gunner Harold Spatz were taken alive. Hallmark, Meter, and Nielsen were captured a few days later in Chinese collaborator territory and turned over to the Japanese. That made 8 Doolittle Raiders in Japanese custody. The Japanese took them to Shanghai. They put them in a building known to American prisoners of war as the Bridge House. The Bridge House was a Japanese military police prison. It had a reputation among Asian dissidents that predated the American war. The Doolittle prisoners were held in solitary cells. They were beaten. They were starved. They were interrogated for weeks about everything the Japanese could think to ask. The location of the Hornet, the plan for the next raid, the names of every officer they had ever served under. The Japanese learned almost nothing useful from them. The men gave their names and their service numbers. They held on to the rest. In August of 1942, the Japanese military held a show trial in Shanghai. There were no defense lawyers. The charges were strafing school children and bombing civilian targets. The 8 Americans pleaded not guilty. The trial lasted less than a day. They were sentenced to death. The verdict reached the desk of Emperor Hirohito for review. Even within the Japanese command, the political consequences of executing every captured airman were considered serious. The emperor commuted 5 of the sentences to life imprisonment. He left 3 of them in place. On the morning of 15th October 1942, Lieutenant Dean Hallmark, Lieutenant William Farrow, and Sergeant Harold Spatz were taken from their cells. They were driven to a cemetery on the outskirts of Shanghai. 3 white crosses had been set up in the dirt. The men were tied to the crosses. A Japanese officer read the death warrant aloud. A firing squad shot them in the head, one at a time. The bodies were cremated. The ashes were returned to American forces after the war. The 5 surviving Doolittle prisoners were not told what had happened. For months, they did not know whether their friends were alive or dead. The Japanese eventually told them. The men in the neighboring cells heard one of them break the news to another by tapping on the wall. The 5 survivors, Metter, Nielsen, Hite, Barr, and DeShazer, were moved to a prison in Nanking. Conditions there were worse than Shanghai. The food was almost nothing. The cells were unheated. Some of the men were taken out for further interrogation that became indistinguishable from torture. Robert Metter, the co-pilot, started to fail. He had been the strongest of the group physically when they had been captured. By the autumn of 1943, he could no longer stand. He developed dysentery. He stopped eating because his body could not keep food. On 1 December 1943, he died in his cell. He weighed less than 90 pounds. The 4 men left were sent back to Shanghai in 1944. For 40 months total, they survived in Japanese custody. They lost teeth from malnutrition. Their hair fell out. They saw nothing of the outside world except the strip of sky visible through the bars of their windows. They were told repeatedly that the war was going well for Japan and that America had surrendered. They did not believe it. Jacob DeShazer, the bombardier, asked his guards for a Bible. After months of asking, the guards finally found one. DeShazer read it for 21 days. He became a Christian during those 3 weeks in the cell. He decided that if he survived the war, he would return to Japan and spend the rest of his life there as a missionary. He survived. In August of 1945, after the atomic bombs and the surrender, American paratroopers dropped onto the Japanese-occupied prison in China where the 4 men were being held. The cells were opened. The Americans inside walked out into the sunlight for the first time in 3 years and 4 months. Chase Nielsen weighed under 100 pounds. He flew home to Utah. He spent the rest of his life speaking about what had happened to him and the men he had served with. Robert Hite returned to Texas, recovered, and lived a long, quiet life. George Barr was deeply affected. After near starvation and infection in Nanking, he spent over a year in hospital and never fully escaped what he endured, though he later married. Jacob DeShazer kept his prison promise, became a missionary, learned Japanese, and returned to Japan in 1948, where he served for decades and even met and influenced one of the Pearl Harbor pilots. A small memorial in Shanghai marks 3 white crosses, replanted where they once stood in 1942. The Doolittle Raid is widely taught, but the cemetery is not. Some stories survive in history books, others only survive in memory. And memory, unlike history, depends on who chooses to keep it alive. That's all for this one. If the captured raiders stayed with you, hit subscribe. War Stories After Dark continues uncovering the men history left behind. Share a forgotten POW story and pass this on to someone who should know what happened to those who never made it fully home.